Good. All right, good evening, everyone. I would like to call this special joint session of the Sterling Heights City Council, the Planning Commission, which is to my right, and the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is to my left, to order. Please join me by standing for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for our invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dear God, please bless our elected officials, granting courage and wisdom to do what is right for all citizens. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right. So we will begin, as all meetings do, with the roll call for all three bodies here. So, Ms. Riska.
First City Council, Mayor Taylor.
Here.
Mrs. Zarowski.
Here.
Mrs. Kosky.
Present.
Mr. Radke.
Present.
Mrs. Schmidt.
Present.
Mr. Yanez.
Here.
Mrs. Yarko.
Present.
The next, the Planning Commission. Mr. Weekay.
Here.
Mr. Inks.
Present.
Ms. Saru.
Here.
Ms. Dowdy. Mr. Garapi.
Here.
Mr. Jaboro.
Here.
Mr. Kopp.
Present.
Mr. Rowe.
Present.
And Mrs. Rice.
Present.
And now the ZBA, Mr. Weekay again,
I'm still here.
Mr. Kosky,
Present.
Ms. Jackson, Mr. D'Angelo, Ms. Faruqi,
Present.
Mr. Fenn,
Present.
Mr. Graff,
Present.
Mr. Anacona,
Present.
and Mr. Shahab.
Present.
All set.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Riska. We need approval of the agenda by the City Council, Planning Commission, and Zoning Board of Appeals. Is there a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Mrs. Kosky.
move to approve the agenda.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Is there any discussion? With no discussion, we'll take a voice vote. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. So I want to thank the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Planning Commission for being here, and of course my colleagues on the City Council. We have a number of, as you guys all know, we've been very busy with development lately. We appreciate the work that the Planning Commission and the Zoning Board of Appeals does and continues to do. We are taking steps towards our next master planning process, and we want to make sure that everybody is on the same page and everybody is receiving the same information. And so the city administration called this meeting, and I think it's going to be a very productive night. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Vanderpool, who will MC it from here, our city manager, and we have a number of presentations lasting about 45 minutes to an hour. And if you are familiar with Mr. Vanderpool, this presentation has been rehearsed multiple times. I've got a run of show that is down to the minute, and we expect that we'll be sticking pretty close to that. But we will have the opportunity after the presentations to have a discussion, to ask questions, and obviously we'll have an opportunity to hear from members of the public. So without any further delay, Mr. Vanderpool.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and I can cut out some of what I was going to say now, thanks to your comments. But as you mentioned, the city is about to embark on our master plan, a new master plan. The last one we did was in 2017. And as you all know, the master plan is vitally important because it really serves as a guiding light, if you will, for all future development that we're going to be seeing coming forward in the next 5, 7, 10 years. This is especially important knowing that the city is mostly built out. I would say 95 plus built out, and the remaining development involves sites that are really challenging to develop. In some cases, existing development has become dated and does not meet modern day needs and demand. In these cases, vacancies exist because the property is not being used to its highest and best use. These areas are ripe for redevelopment, and the new master plan can help pave the way. We can see the value of long-range planning and the positive impact it can have through the ongoing Visioning 2030 plan. It's served us well, and it's really been a transformative plan. We're sitting in part of that transformation right now. The plan has been so successful, thanks to everyone's hard work and all of you around the table, that we're now updating the plan and working on our Visioning 2040 plan. It's hard to keep track of what year we're in with all this strategic planning. The plan, as I mentioned, has been transformative and has set the city on a course of prosperity, resulting in a growing population that's continuing, increased jobs, new housing, significant commercial and high-tech manufacturing investments. It is the perfect formula, resulting in high property values and low tax rates. In fact, Sterling Heights has the highest overall property value in Macomb County and is in the top 5 statewide. Recently, Crane's Detroit listed Sterling Heights as a hot housing market to watch in 2023. The success doesn't just happen. It is a result of exemplary planning, and all of you have played a role. Without long-range planning, we risk being relegated to the sidelines and simply watching events unfold, which for many cities across the country, especially here in Michigan, has not worked out so well. Lakeside Mall is a microcosm of why master planning is so important. Knowing the future of the American Mall was not promising, the city embarked on a major master plan for Lakeside Mall and the entire area. This multi-year plan set the course for a massive forthcoming town center development, which will solidify the area as an economic epicenter for generations to come. Here, we could have sat on the sidelines and let the mall run its course, which may have taken 10 years or more, after which closure would have been inevitable. Then we could have accepted the potential hodgepodge of uses that may have come, like perhaps a warehouse or a distribution center, a run-of-the-mill subdivision, or worse, vacant and dilapidated buildings that would have undoubtedly sucked the life out of that area in the region for decades to come. Instead, the Lakeside Sustainability Master Plan resulted in an exciting $1 billion investment announced last November. And that plan is going through the approval process right now. The Planning Commission is going to see the PUD very soon, and we're working hard on that every single day to make sure that it's implemented. It's a long-range plan. It's going to take years to finalize, but the reward is going to be worth it. We have the same potential for commercial corridors along Van Dyke, Mound, M59, and other significant commercial nodes throughout the city. First, we have to establish the vision, stay on course, most importantly, execute the plan. It sounds simple, but many stakeholders need to be engaged in the community, including residents, businesses, community representatives, most importantly, the mayor, the city council, the planning commission, and the zoning board of appeals. So this evening, we'll be discussing the framework of one vision, one plan, the consequences of blurring the vision, and most importantly, making the vision a reality. Our city development manager and assistant city planner, Dr. Purcell, will kick off the presentations this evening, after which we're going to have plenty of time for questions and comments. The good news is there really isn't a lot of heavy lifting tonight. We're just sowing the seeds for a lot of dialogue and discussion that's going to be forthcoming through the master plan. So, Mayor, at this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Vanderpool, Mayor Taylor, members of City Council, my planning commissioners, and zoning board of appeal members. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm fortunate enough to work with all of you, albeit not all together at once. So I'm really happy to see you all here. Really happy to get discussing our future master planning process and what we anticipate seeing coming to the city in the next few years. And I also would like to thank Sterling Heights Television for putting the room together for us, all the technical aspects of everything. It looks fantastic, and as Mr. Vanderpool said, we can sit back and enjoy our presentations. So we have our presentation this evening called One Community, One Plan. Really titled this because it's based in the community. So starting our master planning process is a grassroots process that we're going to be kind of touching on from top to bottom, what we anticipate seeing in the city and what we anticipate seeing moving forward, and how to bring all of our boards and commissions together in one page as we move forward. So as Mr. Vanderpool stated, we have three brief presentations this evening. First, setting the stage about our proper role of the master plan and how to apply it. Then some obstacles we call blurring the vision and deviating from the plan that is set out in front of you. And then making the vision a reality and the next steps that we'll be embarking on together. Without further ado, I'd like to bring Mr. Fox, our planner, up here to discuss the current framework of the planning we have, and Mr. Amott, our planning consultant, to discuss the steps we'll move forward on adopting a new master plan. Mr. Fox.
Hello, everyone. So I'll be starting us off tonight. Before we look forward to the future, we're going to talk a little bit about where we have been. So we're going to talk a little bit about the current master plan that was first established back in 2017 and the framework which the Office of Planning has been operating off of. This should look familiar to many of you. You can see this plan is specifically the future land use plan, which is a subsection of the master land use plan, and shows areas that we're focusing on redevelopment, specifically around mixed use. You'll see those purple dots kind of scattered about at major intersections. Those are traditional mixed-use nodes. You see the blue going up down the center. That's the Van Dyke mixed-use corridor. That purple blob in the north, that's our North Van Dyke Avenue district, which just a couple years ago, a whole master plan separate from the main master plan was adopted for that. And then the red in the corner is the very exciting Lakeside Village district. So a number of different areas that we've highlighted for redevelopment going forward. This framework has been utilized, like I said, by the Office of Planning since 2017, and we've been able to accomplish a few very cool projects because of it. For example, the Flats, which is a planned unit development City Council saw just about a few weeks ago. It's a multifamily development in the North Van Dyke Avenue corridor. This development is kind of has more of that focus on a denser, more urban feel, which is something that we're looking for in that district in particular. In terms of commercial development, we have two really cool businesses that have opened up, Shake Shack and Mission Barbecue. Some of you may remember Mission Barbecue actually catered City Council a couple weeks ago. And I know I've made a few stops to Shake Shack since it's opened up. So two rather successful commercial businesses that have opened up in the Lakeside area, partially because of the vision the master plan had set forth back in 2017. With that, I'm going to bring up Mr. Amott, our wonderful planning consultant, and he's going to talk a little bit about master plans in general.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. Good evening, everybody. First of all, I'm going to start with the question of what is planning? So planning coordinates the impacts that people and their activities have on the physical and social environment in which they live. Planning impacts many aspects of our community, including location of residential areas, design and accessibility of businesses, features of parks, extent of municipal services, and the preservation and protection of our natural resources. What is a master plan? A master plan might be described as the community's blueprint for the future. It is a comprehensive document that examines land use, transportation, infrastructure, natural resources, housing, economic development, agriculture, and other key elements of the community. Master plans include long-range goals and objectives for the development for the next 10 to 20 years. A big question here tonight is, how does a master plan relate to zoning? So first of all, it's important to consider this relationship because everyone here is involved in zoning in some way, shape, or form. The zoning ordinance is one of the key mechanisms to implement the goals of the master plan. It is standard practice to amend a zoning ordinance as response to the master plan. But overall, there are some distinct roles that the master plan and zoning ordinance each hold. For example, the master plan being a long-range vision, whereas the zoning ordinance is immediate law that properties and their owners must adhere to daily. The master plan is a guidance document offering recommendations to meet broad goals, whereas the zoning ordinance is regulatory, it's law. The master plan contains policy recommendations which guide precise decisions, whereas the zoning ordinance is enforced. Both the master plan and zoning ordinance must be considered by the city when making discretionary decisions for zoning cases. For example, the rezonings, the planned unit developments, the special approval land uses, those should all use the master plan as a guide in your decision-making, but they shall also follow the procedural standards and specific dimensional use, very specific zoning standards of the zoning ordinance as well. And a master plan is required by the State Act to have what's called a zoning plan, specifically a plan that explains how the master plan complements the zoning ordinance. This might, as you see in the chart below, this might entail a relation of future land uses to existing zoning districts, and it might also entail the creation of new zoning districts, as well as the review or amendment of existing districts. The zoning plan may also consider how preferences regarding height, area, bulk, location, and design also fit into the zoning ordinance. And there are some very important master plan recommendations set by the Michigan Planning Enabling Act. Master plans are to be reviewed every 5 years. As you know, Planning Commission, you did just conduct your 5-year review, and doing this review really ensures that you will have a current and relevant plan to today's changing times and needs. The State Act also spells out a very thorough master plan creation process, which I will move on to here. So first of all, the city will send out its notice of intent to plan notices to required entities. Those are neighboring jurisdictions, neighboring local governments, utility authorities, etc. Next, the city works on the master plan's actual draft. This step entails a lot of substance, as you'll see in a moment. It's a very thorough process. And then the draft plan goes to City Council for the distribution of the plan for public comments. Public comments can then be received for an official time period that's 63 days. The city needs to specify when and where written comments will be provided or emailed, for example. And again, this comment must last for at least 63 days. Once the public comment period is finished, Planning Commission will then hold a public hearing. Planning Commission considers the written public comments that have been submitted, as well as verbal comments during the public hearing, and the plan may then be adopted. Copies of the adopted plan must then be posted publicly on the website and made available to residents who may ask for it. So in preparing a master plan, it's very important that we all have an expectation of how the plan may be formed. We should all be considerate of these foundational approaches. First, we really need to make sure that we understand. One of the first steps in the process is understanding existing conditions such as demographic data, socioeconomic data, land use data, and other pertinent data. We also all need to be very good listeners. There should be thorough public participation meetings, perhaps on certain topics that form the plan. Broad comments and themes from these meetings should be considered by the city. We will then work to create a vision, and this may involve the development of goals, objectives, and strategies. Now we will plan, which involves developing the future land use plan and map, and perhaps the creation of other sub-area plans. And acting is very important. Action involves setting the teeth of the plan, which are usually the implementation plan and the zoning plan that I've already spoken about. And then the drafting of the plan might entail a number of plan elements. Particularly, it might include the following themes of housing and neighborhoods. Addressing important housing trends is very key to sustaining a healthy population. This might entail making sure that we have attainable housing in the city, as well as planning for the built housing environment, which might be missing middle housing, high-quality multifamily developments, and ensuring that there's a variety of unit types and sizes and price ranges in the city. Also, sustainability, environmental, and natural resource management is very important. Planning for a more sustainable city is something the city's doing very well, as is evident with a recent award-winning sustainability plan. Continuing to make sure the city is growing or changing responsibly while making sure the community has a balance of environmental, economic, and social health is important. Transportation and circulation is key. Planning for all modes of transportation, including the non-motorized users such as bicyclists and pedestrians, is very important. This might include complete streets planning or mapping out priority corridors for different types of transportation infrastructure. Parks and Recreation, standing in this beautiful building, is obviously very evident here in the city. And it's very important to keep prioritizing that and making sure that all residents have access to recreational areas, preferably within their own neighborhoods. As has already been stated by Mr. Vanderpool, redevelopment strategies are a key consideration as well. A lot of the land within the city is built out or has been used in some way, shape, or form, but some uses may no longer be efficient, such as large swaths of parking lots, and considering how the city redevelops now is increasingly important. Just summarizing everything, the zoning plan and implementation plan are really the teeth of the master plan, and the implementation plan can set other implementation strategies as well, not just zoning. It can create programs, it can create subcommittees to focus on a particular topic, or it might drive other policy ideas or ordinances. So there's a lot a plan can do. And at this point, I'd like to pass the presentation back to Dr. Parcell for a summary here. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Fox, Mr. Amont. So this part, as evident by the presentation, is incredibly technical. This represents the whole master planning process is the community blueprint. Everything you see in your staff report, the one photo of the future land use map and the blurb that we put in there, is the distillation of all of this, these 63-day noticing periods, the abundant community engagement sessions, everything that the community desires for the future moving forward distilled into one photo, which is why it's so important to take that direction as we start to evaluate our projects. Additionally, as mentioned, the master plan and the zoning ordinance, while separate, rely on one another. As planners, we have what I like to say are tools in our toolbox as we evaluate projects that help shape development in Sterling Heights. And these are two of our strongest ones, but without one another, they can fail. So putting these on the same page and using them in tandem as we implement the master plan's vision is crucially important. And finally, trusting the process is incredibly important as well. As mentioned, this is an incredibly long technical process, but good planning doesn't happen overnight. It relies on everyone in this room moving forward and every member of the community, every resident in our business community as well, to provide input and get everyone on the same page to build the Sterling Heights that we want to see moving forward. However, there are perils of deviating from the plan, and I'd like to pass it over to Ms. Richards from the Office of Planning to start to discuss what happens when we blur the vision set forth in the master plan.
Thank you, Dr. Parcell. So as was stated, we are now going to look at some ways in which our vision can become blurred and the perils associated. It is important for us to call attention to them now so that we can ensure the master plan has the most impact as possible. The first and most detrimental way our vision can become blurred is if the zoning ordinance is not updated to reflect the changes in the master plan. As Mr. Amont stated, the zoning ordinance is the way in which the master plan is enforced. So it is important to codify the vision that is outlined in the plan within the ordinance. If not, the city does not have the ability to enforce or encourage the type of development called for within the plan without utilizing special development options. Further, variances, specifically use variances, should be rare to ensure that we are sticking with the vision that is outlined within the master plan. Next, it is incredibly important that there's coordination amongst the various bodies, and tonight is a great first step in doing that, and we're really happy to see you guys all here. So when each of you evaluates a project, it is important that you consider the master plan, as we have done historically. Further, each time a project comes before you, staff writes a report including how it fits within the master plan, and you can utilize this to supplement your own evaluations. If all bodies do not consider the impacts a project has on the vision that is laid out within the master plan, the implementation of the plan can become spotty. Next, without the support of the community, implementing the plan becomes difficult. As such, robust community engagement must occur throughout the master planning process to ensure the plan reflects what the community needs and wants. Further, it is vital to incorporate public education so that residents feel empowered to participate in the planning process. The new master plan will continue to address connectivity from land use to trails and sidewalks to alternative modes of transportation and EVs. If we do not stick with the vision, the city can lose the opportunity to embrace these alternate modes of transportation. Ensuring residents have the freedom to traverse the city in multiple ways that are both safe and enjoyable provides an increase in quality of life and ensures residents are able to thrive regardless of age and ability. Lastly, we must balance the desire to develop with the quality of the development. As a city that is primarily built out, each development has the potential to impact the city for decades to come. As such, each new development and redevelopment needs to be carefully considered against the master plan. We should not be redeveloping for redevelopment's sake, but to build the vision that we have identified within the plan. This can become difficult if a parcel has sat vacant for a long period of time and a development not consistent with the master plan is proposed. However, I encourage all of us to think long-term and be patient for development that helps us to achieve our vision. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Dr. Parcell to discuss some ways in which the master plan can act to safeguard our vision.
All right. With the master plan in place, hopefully with the help of our boards and commissions, we can kind of mitigate some of the pitfalls that Ms. Richards discussed in her presentation. First and foremost, when it comes to residential development, that includes balancing new development with existing residents. We've discussed a great deal in our meetings of protecting our neighborhoods, but not only just protecting the development there, but celebrating it as well. We've discussed with our planning commission at our review of our 5-year master planning session in December, how we can kind of celebrate the neighborhoods that Sterling Heights built on by naming them, coming up with ways to identify them and their significance to the city. And then also as we move forward with looking at new development, how to thoughtfully take care of this in a way that protects the existing housing stock, but finds ways to amplify these neighborhoods as well. Opportunities to do this, as you see in the photos here, are through pattern book homes. These are prefabricated designs from the Michigan Municipal League that are meeting the city's codes and would be approved on a standard residential lot in our R60 districts, allowing for an ease of development to help with the construction of these homes. Also, finding missing middle housing in areas where it is not only thoughtful, but helpful for people to find access to some of our high-density mixed-use nodes and corridors. Additionally, finding ways to implement a variety of housing types like ADUs is important to enhance these districts as well. Finding different cost points for people to come in that want to live in the city of Sterling Heights is incredibly important, and providing opportunity for them to do so is incredibly important as well. And then finally, through our site plan review standards, looking at building materials and quality building materials to help enhance our building stock in the city. We don't want development for development's sake. We want development that will last. And this is how we review this as the Office of Planning. When it comes to commercial development, it's important to balance new development with existing business owners. First and foremost, from the city and also from the master planning standpoint, it starts by being a good neighbor. We have a very strong business community that I'm proud to work with day in and day out. And to help entice more people to come work in the city as well, we have to find opportunity and be creative to help them develop in some of these areas. Mr. Amott discussed how we're an incredibly developed city, but there's always opportunity to find unique ways to bring them in some of these areas designated through the master land use plan. This includes providing benefits through our overlay districts as we evaluate them in plans through the Planning Commission and City Council, and also ensuring smooth integration to help protect the existing business stock as well. This makes sure that we have everything from the Code of Ordinances set up for success that goes in tandem with our master land use plan, and that areas of high density designation for development are outlined in our future land use map. Now, if you see here, this node is shown right here on the actual Google Street View, which is pretty, cool little visualization for you there. But something that we touch on a great deal in the Office of Planning and look forward in our master land use plan moving forward is land use efficiency in our nodes. This one at Ryan and 18 Mile is a really good example of how we can see how to maximize every square foot of developable land in Sterling Heights to provide amenities for the people that live here. If you noticed on the southeast corner here, there's a lot of parking. It's a lot of underutilized parking. I've heard in meetings before every parking space can cost developers upwards of $10,000. So that represents a huge fee of land that's being underutilized. What we can do here is provide new development that is walkable and accessible for transit, as Ms. Richards discussed, but also helps keep these businesses visible from the street front. So in that plaza, you have access from 18 Mile and Ryan, making it so everyone is visible. We can find ways through our sign ordinance to identify all of our businesses that are in there, but also find ways to create this outlot development that we're starting to see in some of our large commercial areas. You see this on the other office park nodes up in there as well. A lot of parking can be underutilized, and one way to help that out is through landscaping as well. So with our master land use plan moving forward, we're placing an emphasis on the tree canopy, improving our landscaping and signage to help all the businesses make sure that they're visible from the roadways, and finding opportunities for them to locate in these nodes. Here's another example of a node that you may all be familiar with the recent Savvy Sliders application that came through the Planning Commission and was ultimately denied for not meeting the intention of the mixed-use overlay. This is Dodge Park and 15 Mile. This is a wonderful example because it highlights some examples of the corridor that leads up to City Hall on Dodge Park. There's parking that is behind the structures and areas so people can walk freely into the businesses on the western side of the node. But also there's an opportunity in the south for prime redevelopment if it's something that meets the intention of the city's master plan. This is a really unique kind of southern portion of the node here because there's a shared access agreement between these businesses. So by working with these businesses throughout the master planning process to find what their intention is of their development moving forward, finding ways to help fill the vacancies that are on the southeastern corner of this node, and then creating ways through the city and regulatory ordinances to help them succeed is going to help bring some new development and new opportunity to this mixed-use node in particular. Then also, the master land use plan will discuss a change in market demand. As we discussed at the SEMCOG regional forecasting, there's a changing land use that comes out of every 5 years based on market trends. First and foremost, it comes from coming out of the pandemic. There's a decreased need for certain types of office space. Different offices are in demand as we return into work in person every day. But there's some office spaces that in this market we're finding for our meetings with developers are not quite feasible that are outlined as allowable land uses in our current master plan. So making sure that we have a good understanding of what type of office, what scale and size of office is going to be incredibly important. And then also an increased need for housing. As we see in most of our city council meetings, people want to live in Sterling Heights, and we need to make sure that we have a market available for people to move here. This ties back to the missing middle housing and different types of housing units that we want to see in the city. That way people can find a point of entry to help the city grow and prosper. With that, in summary, I will pass it back to Ms. Richards to conclude this portion of the presentation.
Thank you. So in summary, we want to stick with the plan. We're going through this robust process, so we want to make it count. The zoning ordinance needs to be updated to reflect the changes in the master plan. We need to engage and educate the public to ensure we are planning for what the community both wants and needs. And lastly, we need to be thoughtful and patient when it comes to redevelopment to ensure developments are furthering the vision that we have outlined in our master plan. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Dr. Parcell, who is going to discuss how we will make our vision a reality.
All right. Eat a lot of meat tonight, so I hope that you're enjoying yourself so far. Our final presentation tonight is making the vision a reality, the next steps that we're going to be going on together over the next few years. As we mentioned throughout this, the master plan is a community-based kind of vision for what we want Sterling Heights to be. And all of you are going to play an integral role in this moving forward. Most importantly, as we enter this together, planning isn't just for tomorrow. This is long-range planning that we're anticipating being the framework for the community for years to come. Moving forward, our anticipation is with this rewrite of the master plan, we have something that we can build off of for the next several decades as we meet the goals outlined in our soon to be starting to work on 2040 visioning plan and what we already have established in our 2030 visioning plan. Our goal is to take all of these sub-area plans that staff and the boards and commissions have worked so hard on, like our North Van Dyke Avenue master plan, our sustainability plan, and then our 2030 visioning plan, and fold them all together into our new master land use plan, making sure that all of our regulatory tools are on the same page and showcasing the same intention for the city. But also, everyone in this room is going to play an important role as we move forward. We've covered obstacles that can prohibit the community's vision. We've covered the steps that we're going to take and the process that we're going to be getting there. But I'd like to take a brief moment to talk about the role that the boards will have to play in this process as well. So first and foremost, from the Zoning Board of Appeals, we view you as the first line of defense for protecting our master land use plan. When you look at variances for how we view our parcels, variances should be strictly granted on what we have in our code of ordinance for hardships and practical difficulty. Our zoning ordinance is written with the intention of helping shape development from its physical form and use, and upholding the zoning ordinance falls onto the shoulders of the Zoning Board of Appeals. So by working with you moving forward and examining any type of deficiencies or problems we have with the zoning ordinance, we can create policy solutions to better help facilitate development in the city, and also work with you to uphold the intention of the master plan. For our planning commission, you're our first line of review for future projects coming in. When we have PUD plans and rezonings, you're the first board that has a crack at reviewing them, ensuring that they meet the intention of the master plan and how they fit in with the zoning ordinance and how the site plan plays in with surrounding businesses. Additionally, you also have the special ability to be the decision makers on the approval of special approval land uses, placing a great deal of importance on your board. So when it comes to the Planning Commission, all of this framework that we have distilled into our staff report is how we can work with you to base a decision on the project's alignment with our master land use plan and our zoning ordinance. And finally, City Council. You're the final approving body for some of our larger, projects that we've discussed in here. The flats being one of them is a PUD concept plan that goes into an agreement that the city works to, build this development and make it a reality. You also are the final approving body for rezonings, and we work with you to do a lot of studies and amendments to our code of ordinances to make sure that we are up to standard on best practices and reflecting what the city wants to have moving forward. But most importantly, you're the city board that is most able to broadcast what the message of the community vision is. So we move forward with our master plan, as Councilmember Koski mentioned, and coming to our community visioning sessions and working with us for our community participation. We want council to be involved every way, because when we look at our projects and have your council meetings, you're the best face to help broadcast what we have distilled through our community participation and helping us work with the business community as well. So, as we move forward, we want to brief touch on what's next for Sterling Heights. First and foremost, if we've talked about nearly every section of this presentation, prioritizing development in our nodes. This is from our first existing 2017 master land use plan, a way to prioritize development in a phasing way that is thoughtful and intentional. Here you see different phases where we identify different parcels where we can kind of move development around, work with developers, and point out where we can find opportunity to develop. It's been mentioned several times, we're an incredibly built-out city. This leads staff to be a little creative, and we need the tools through our zoning ordinance and master plan to be able to do so. Additionally, as mentioned by Mr. Vanderpool, we're coming up on an incredibly large transformative development of Lakeside. Way back in 2017, in the bubbles there, you'll see the sketch drawings and concept plans of what Lakeside could be imagined to be with all that parking being redeveloped into amenities. And throughout the years, that's evolved into this wonderful, incredible, well-landscaped project that you see here in front of us. And this investment to the city is substantial. Following the master plan, following what is enabled in the Lakeside plan, and following what is outlined in our sustainability plan, and through our code of ordinances is going to be crucial. This is an incredibly large, intensive project that we really only have one opportunity to pull off in the way that is envisioned by the city and what best benefits the city. Furthermore, another opportunity where that takes place is in our North Van Dyke Avenue. You see here on the left side of the screen where it currently exists in the North Van Dyke Avenue, as pulled from the North NVDA master plan. And you see here a wonderful, beautiful tapestry of what is potentially going to be there right by City Hall up in the northern portion of the city. There's a lot of different uses that will be allowed here, a lot of great attraction for business owners who want to come here, and potentially even a great deal of residences to help people find entry into the city through redevelopment of the NVDA. That's already started so far, and hopefully the first of many projects to come, as mentioned with the flats earlier, with the Chaldean Community Foundation, an example of what we envision as we move forward in this area. It's an incredible project with the parking in the rear and facing the street, creating a very welcoming entry point from the north into Sterling Heights that's walkable, opportunity for businesses to move into there and residents to move in there as well, and be a part of some of our major commercial corridors in the north end of the city. Additionally, as I like to keep discussing this one, because it's one of my favorite soon-to-be projects that we're working on, here's what the master plan shows that the North Van Dyke Avenue area is currently existing as. It's a lot of vehicles, a lot of intimidating movement for pedestrians, and a lot of roadways that are shown in the plan. And as we move forward, we want to make sure that Sterling Heights is known as a vibrant and welcoming community. We can do this through creating areas for people to gather and come into the city, public landscaping and public seating as well, and public amenities that are friendly and enabled through the master plan. So, in conclusion, I was going to break you all up into groups, have a little exercise, but we're going to go through just a few more slides to discuss what we've kind of talked about today. We only get one chance to do this redevelopment, and we're going to show some of the pitfalls of what may happen if this development goes in a way that goes against the master plan. For example, this is an example of poor parking breaking up a downtown. You see here it's a really wonderful multi-million-dollar renovation of a historic building. There's on-street parking and availability for people to walk in a safe manner throughout the downtown. However, there's an entire block dedicated to parking right there. There's residents and mixed-use restaurants and gathering areas throughout there for people to come up. There's thoughtful parking placed behind the development to ensure that the developers can meet the need of the parking that their development requires, but they're inhibited by growing in any way or providing new opportunity through the parking that's existing there. Another example of that is how infill surface lot development can kind of break up any continuity. As we've mentioned, we have projects coming in the North Van Dyke district that are going to be complementary to each other and building to create an entire district as a whole. Here, as shown also in our North Van Dyke plan, there's outdoor seating and landscaping for people to come and enjoy a restaurant. There's commercial uses there, but to get to there from the restaurant, you have to walk across 2 means of egress into a parking lot, creating a dangerous situation for any person who might want to walk around multiple uses at once. Although there is parking provided in the rear of some of these structures and on the street, this is an example of inhibitive infill development. Here's an example as well of kind of breaking up a block. Here's a gas station that is on the corner there, creating 2 means of egress for anyone who is walking to any of these other mixed-use developments. As we outline these intensity developments in certain areas in our master plan, we want to thoughtfully ensure that this land use is dedicated in the city in a way that's safe for our residents as well. And unfortunately, something like this, where the parking or the entryway takes up a large swath of that, we would have concerns about people walking around the corner and getting to some of these other developments. We see that here as well. This is a relatively built-out block. There's multiple forms of transportation, as Ms. Richards discussed. And here we have a project that if we wrote into our master plan that has one continuous kind of mixed-use area, doesn't meet the intention of what the plan would lay out. The building, in terms of scale, is shorter, it's set back further, and it creates 2 means of egress for an auto-centric use that may inhibit people from taking their scooters shown there, walking, or public transit across the frontage of the building. This is examples of hard-baked development that is here for a long time. Filling in something on a lot that's available and ready that does not meet the intention of the master plan can create an inhibitory placement on a block that can stop and stunt the development around it. And that's something that we're putting in place to try and avoid with our updated master plan and accompanying zoning ordinance. So in summary, everything that we have today focuses on the long term. It's an incredibly intensive process that staff will be undertaking with large amounts of community input, and to ensure quality development, it's going to take time. The master land use plan will be here to help guide this development from our business community, for our residences, and our boards and commissions. And speaking of that, boards and commissions all will play a valuable role. When it comes to land use and zoning, each board can help staff uphold the vision of the master land use plan and help evaluate projects in a role that is most beneficial for the city of Sterling Heights. And in conclusion, we only get one chance to enact our vision. Following our code and our master plan is setting the blueprint for the community for decades to come. All of these plans folded into one will shape what we hope is going to be an incredibly successful and attractive Sterling Heights moving forward. And we really only have one chance to enact that. With how built out the community is, how creative we're being with development, we need to ensure that the community's vision is carried out. And with all of your help, we hope to be able to do that. And now I open up for any questions. But again, I'd like to say thank you all for coming here tonight and sitting through our presentation. I look forward to anything you may have to contribute.
And Mayor, just in conclusion, I wanted to emphasize, again, the reason we have placed so much emphasis on, we get this one chance because in the past, 20, 30 years ago, when we had vast amounts of green space, it was okay if we didn't always hit it perfectly because we would have a second or third chance. But we don't have that now being fully built out. So the wrong use in the wrong place can set the master plan back by decades. So all of us are in positions to build on the successes that we've accomplished over the many decades in the city. And we have to make sure that we do whatever we can to not encumber the master plan with low-hanging fruit. Like a single fast food restaurant in a mixed-use node, or a warehouse, perhaps, as I mentioned earlier, in the Lakeside Center. While these uses may serve a purpose and they may have a place in our city, we must be thoughtful and mindful of the long-term consequences as it relates to the master plan. So I want to thank all of you for attending tonight and allowing us to kind of set the stage for what's going to be coming up over the next year, and to the need to also stay focused on the current master plan while we're getting to the next level. And I also want to thank, as Dr. Purcell did earlier, everyone who worked hard to put together the presentations this evening and get the room set up and make this as comfortable as possible. So thank you, Mayor, and we're happy to address any questions or comments.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Vanderpool. Thank you to members of our planning staff, Dr. Parcell, Mr. Fox, Ms. Richards, and Mr. Amat for your presentations tonight. This is a vitally important issue for us. I know on the City Council, we feel very strongly about developing the community in the appropriate way, and with the limited amount of land available left, we want to make a big impact with what we do have. We certainly have policies and priorities that we want to see put into our master land use plan, but as the slide said, our members of our ZBA and our Planning Commission, you're going to be receiving these things first. And we want your input. We want you to be able to take ownership of this process as well. So with that, I am going to just open it up across the whole spectrum here. There's not going to be any particular order of who needs to go first. So if there are any members of any of these bodies that have questions for anyone that presented tonight, we also have members of O'Reilly Rancilio here that can answer any legal questions if you do have any. It's obviously city administration and our planning staff. So I'd like it to be a discussion. If you have comments, questions, anything else you want to say, this is the time to have them asked and answered. So is there anyone who'd like to go first?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Yanis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll go first. I have a couple of statements, and then I have several questions. I think we should have set this up a little bit like question time that they have in England, and we should have put everybody in the middle there and just make them stand up.
You don't want me to boo you here, do you?
Well, that was the whole point of making them stand up. We could boo them if we didn't like their answer.
You can boo anybody.
We can boo anybody. Anyways, I do want to say a couple of things. One, I know my colleague, Councilwoman Ziarko, has been championing pattern book homes. I think it's a great idea, especially when we have a minimal number of lots. I love the whole idea of sweat equity, people putting in the effort to build their own home or have someone build it, whatever. So I like that. I do like the idea of ADUs. One of the questions I do have, though, is are ADUs going to cause an issue with parking, especially ADUs, in the neighborhoods, and will there be, how that will be addressed, parking issues with ADUs. So as far as questions go, and whoever wants to answer can answer, how does our sustainability plan fit into the master plan, and how do you take that into consideration? And since the doctor has the highest level of... Okay.
Not a problem. So ADUs, I want me to touch on ADUs and parking as well?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure. The purpose of the master land use plan is to move forward with intention of something that works for the community of where the land use is not only going to be able to kind of handle this increased development, but also is favorable for it. So the city does allow street parking in some areas. We'll have to work with our code enforcement team, find a full comprehensive list of where we have the ability to kind of find lots that can fit ADUs, and then kind of move the master land use plan to accommodate that as we move forward. There's a lot of data and housing study that will go into the master plan, including a housing profile that we'll base all of our recommendations on that you'll be able to review. And hopefully we'll find a great idea for opportunity in that review of that study. In terms of the sustainability plan is quite honestly fantastic. It has a wide-ranging reach of recommendations for parks, non-motorized trails and transportation options. And all of this, as we look at where development is going to be moving in the city moving forward, helps kind of fuel this connectivity. So if we find something that is easily accessible through trail routes and safe for people to transfer or move to, maybe we uncover a new mixed-use node in our city that could be developed. I know in particular, Mr. Inks identified a node that may be great public open space. I can't remember the one right now at our planning commission meeting, but that is a great reference to kind of tie in with our park system and also help increase our non-motorized plan as well. So it all ties together in terms of that, and then also looking at how to increase landscaping and parking lots, address runoff, in particular an issue that we want to address in the city as we start to look toward addressing some problems with concrete and finding ways to tie it all together to help ensure that new development is held up to a standard that our Office of Engineering approves of as well.
So would you say that sustainability is a checkbox as you go through the process? Is this plan sustainable? Is what we're doing here, is it sustainable?
Yeah, it's something
It's not an
that-
afterthought, is what I'm saying.
No, it's not an afterthought at all. The sustainability plan also has a great kind of list that we want to model the upcoming master land use plan off of, which is actionable items and responsible parties. So that way we actually have actionable metrics that we can move forward on as we start to accomplish some of our goals in the city as well. And by implementing those into the master plan as well, we help guide, overall land use patterns and development in the city in a much more thoughtful direction.
And then something that was brought up in the presentation was using socioeconomic data.
Yeah.
And, the city has started this journey on diversity, equity, inclusion. Is that taken into consideration when we do this planning process? One of the things I'm concerned about is maybe a first come, first served mindset. So somebody wants to build market-based housing, the next lot over is only for income-based, right? And then nobody wants to build that. So I'm just kind of wondering how we dovetail socioeconomic data into the master plan.
Yeah, definitely. Building out a community profile is the very first foundation of what you'll find in the master land use plan.
We're an aging population, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's something that SEMCOG has discussed, something that is going to be important for looking at how we shape this development and what type of land uses we allow. So we'll base everything off of an in-depth socioeconomic profile of the community, what our current standards are, and then also what they're forecasted to be moving forward. That we'll review every 5 years moving forward as required by statute, and then pair that with a housing condition profile and type of land use assessment of the city. And hopefully by building all of this data, we'll start to form recommendations on areas for future development and where we can tie all of this data into tangible results moving forward. So it's really the basis and the backbone of this. We take a broad stroke at looking at everything in the city from a data perspective, tie it in with all the community engagement that we'll be receiving to get actual wants and desires from the residents, and hopefully make some very strong and impactful decisions based off that.
Thank you. And we're also looking at changes in modes of transportation. Or it won't be long before we're all driving electrified vehicles that need to be plugged in. We've talked in the past about, we as a country have talked about driverless vehicles as transportation. So how does transportation fit into the master plan?
Addressing transportation, as Ms. Richards did in her slides, is important not only from the types of vehicles driven, but all the different modes that'll incorporate into this as well. So non-motorized transportation, tying that in from the sustainability plan, ensuring that our trails and sidewalks are up to a quality standard, that they're safe to travel on is going to be important. We also get to work with a lot of regional authority throughout our master planning process as well. So part of the noticing we do is to the Regional Transit Authority. They'll have an opportunity to weigh in, address the bus routes throughout the city, ensure that they're up to capacity and standard, make recommendations on development based on that. As for electric vehicles, I know the city is making a large push on this. You'll see in a few weeks, I think, at council, a presentation on EV parking and what the city is doing to position itself for this moving forward. And that will be a consideration that we'll include as well. So we'll get to pull in a lot of regional stakeholders in the transportation portion of it, build off of our existing sustainability plan, and hopefully find a great direction to move forward.
So you are having conversations with SMART?
Yeah, it's going to be part of the noticing. So once we start that and start to put out our RFP and send out our intent to plan, they'll be notified of it, and we'll bring them to the table as well as part of our community stakeholder meetings.
Okay, thank you. And then the last thing I want to say, Mr. Mayor, is one of the concerns that I've expressed in the past, and hopefully this meeting will help resolve it, is our PUD process and the conflict that's caused between City Council and the Planning Commission. And we really need to get that resolved. We all need to be on the same page. I don't like our process where the planning commission can deny somebody because they don't like something, and that developer has a chance to change it when they get to city council and basically present not a completely different plan, but, you know, they take the comments of the planning commission to heart, but the planning commission doesn't get a chance to rehear those. And unless you either read the minutes or actually watch the tape of the planning commission, or you were there, you don't really get to understand the conversation that was had around that project. So I hope out of this process, we can become more in tune with each other when it comes to approving PUDs. So that's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for the time.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Yanez. Anyone else with any questions or comments? Mr. Garapi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, in my time on the Planning Commission, I've learned that being a planning commissioner is all about balancing competing interests and trying to come up with situations or solutions where everybody gets to win. One of the things that we have seen over and over again and was exemplified during the presentation were cases where you will have people proposing developments that don't truly fit in with the vision that the city has, for example, with the case of mixed use, all right? We've had cases come before us where there were things that obviously just did not fit in with mixed use. It was not a good plan for that particular parcel of land. And then we've had other cases where it's sort of anybody's guess as to whether or not it fits in. And it depends on how you look at it, whether or not, for example, the node that I'm the most personally familiar with, that being 15 Mile and Ryan, it's designated as being a mixed-use node, but and right now it kind of fits the description without being the sort of mixed use that we envision with uses being stacked on top of each other. So I guess that there's a couple of things that sort of come from this. One of them is, you know, how do we walk that fine line of balancing the interests of the people who are the purchasers and the developers of the land with the city's desire to move towards more of a mixed-use environment? And how do we do that and stay within the confines of the law that we have to live within? And how do we do that in such a way that we produce these win-win sort of outcomes that we strive towards? The other thing is I agree with Mr. Yanez that, you know, the PUD plan or the way that we handle PUDs as a planning commission and then it being moved over to the city council without us having a second bite at the apple after perhaps revisions are made. How do we resolve that problem so that if something needs to be resolved, if there's a disagreement by the planning commission that a PUD proposal is a good one, how do we get to a place where we can rehear it if they choose to revise it before it goes to council? So I'd like to take any comments that there are on those two things.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Garapi. Are you looking for just a discussion on that from other members here, or anything official from city administration on that, or city attorney?
I think that we need a discussion. I have a great deal of respect for Dr. Parcells and his organization. He's clearly very educated and he has a very clear idea of what he wants to do. But I think that this is an opportunity for all of us to weigh in on, you know, how we achieve these outcomes.
Understood. Okay. Anyone else with any comments or anything that they'd like to add to Mr. Garapi's comments as well? Ms. Wright.
I come from the point of view, it's not really our job to make the developers happy. I mean, obviously we want them investing in our city, but if their plans don't match with our city's master plan, it's not our job to let them come on in and develop. They need to change their plans to match what we want. So should we really be trying to make everybody happy? Shouldn't the city be the one that comes first?
If I was going to respond to that, what I would say is that, you know, our Constitution enshrines the idea that property is, you know, one of the foundational rights, that you have the right to determine how you use your property. Now, that doesn't mean that we let people put fast food restaurants up in residential zones. I wouldn't argue for that. I'm not an extremist. But at the same time, the people who are doing the development of the land are the ones who are the most closely in touch with the market. And the market has been proven over many, many decades to be a very efficient way to determine what the best way is to use a given entity, that being, some sort of capital or land in this case. So I'm not entirely sure that I'm fully on board with the idea that we out of hand reject a development that is not directly in line with what we're hoping for as a city in terms of mixed use.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Wright, anything else for now?
Not right now.
Okay. Mr. Weekai.
Well, I'm going to give the floor to Councilman Radke if he,
Okay, Mr. Radke.
Sure. Just to respond to that, the right to develop your property isn't unlimited. We set the master plan. The master plan is the plan. If a developer buys a property, I hope he is looking at what the master plan says can be built upon that property. It is not incumbent upon us, and I say this as all of us together, to make it right if it was wrong to begin with. He spent the money, or she. They bought the property. So to me, the master plan is what should hold through. That's why I've spoken for a long time about why the zoning ordinance does not match the master plan. And it creates situations where developers think they can play a game, and they can come before us and say, well, the master plan says this, but the zoning ordinance says that, so I should have a right to do whatever the heck I want. And we've had many instances recently, especially when it comes to mixed-use zones, of businesses that should not be locating there, getting the okay through this process. And that, as Dr. Parcell said, affects not just what is going to happen in the surrounding properties, but like Scooter's Coffee is going to be there for the next 15, 20 years. And that's going to be a pedestrian dead zone for the next 10 to 20 years, because we've allowed that development to take place right there. So we have to think about harmoniously putting these properties together. And with the ideas that we set forth the master plan, I think it is harmonious. I guess that's all I'll say to Mr. Garapi on that.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Weekai.
Mr. Mayor, good evening, everyone. Thank you for all coming. I just want to just briefly touch, I don't want to discuss any particular cases that we had come through us, but what I would say is I basically probably is the most one in the Planning Commission that had raised some eyebrows when it comes to, this maybe I raised a lot, but this one I noticed that when I made a statement that I think the PUD is the right way, having the final stop at the City Council. City Council, you all, and you, Mr. Mayor, represent the city. You've been elected and you have a vision for the city, and the residents trusted you to lead the city with that vision. So I am okay with the way PUD is by coming us, giving us a recommendation, and yeah, we shave it up or trim it here and there, but ultimately, I always say you have the right and you should have the final say on it. So I'm completely comfortable with that. If there is another way to, and I know Dr. Parcell does a great job if he sees a vision if he sees a plan that fits on, and he also does a great job if the plan doesn't fit in the vision. He argues that as well. So, and gives us the backup material. So I would say as far as Planning Commission goes and the PUD takes place, I think it is, they should have a right to change the plan if they needed to. So I'm okay with the way it is right now, and I think that, again, you represent the city, you represent the residents, and you should have the final say on that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weekai. Anyone else on this discussion or anything else?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Rowe.
Mr.
Yes,
Davis.
I'd just like to play off the conversation that we've been having. One of the challenge in the Planning Commission, Mr. Garapi, really elaborated on it a bit, and that is in our nodes, you'll have these individual isolated parcels. Some are 2 acres, some are maybe not 5 acres, very small. A developer comes in with a proposal, maybe for an apartment building. Well, we would like that node to be a multi-use area. But when you come in with a single development, it's the challenge of the planning commission to determine with the master plan and with, what the provisions of these nodes is, does that particular development fit in with, even though it's a single-purpose development that we're talking about, does it fit in with the overall scheme for this particular node? And we've had a couple of those, and we've kind of wrestled with that. And, some we determined that, yes, there are going to be each individual, single-purpose kinds of developments coming in some of these nodes. And hopefully, in the end of the day, that node will be multi-use. But the challenge is, how do we deal with the individual isolated parcels that are in there? So that's something that we've been grappling with on occasion with these nodes. And the nodes are a great idea. I mean, it's in our plan. It's a viable thing to do, and we want to increase our ability to have multi-use kinds of developments in our community. So. If I may divert from that a bit, first of all, I want to compliment the staff. Early on in this process, the staff presented us with a master land use plan update list. They went through the entire text of the 2017 plan, and what needs to be, what is okay for now, what needs to be updated, what needs to be updated maybe sometime in the future. And they did a fine job of bringing us along in terms of, and us providing the feedback of what needs to be done to create an updated master plan. And I think that's very commendable. We also would ask with the staff is for us to think about, what are some of the key areas and dynamics that are going on that, we'd like to see, happen in the master plan. And I could think of, in fact, I was thinking about it earlier. There are three of them. Certainly housing is a big item. And we have these isolated parcels, and we've had developers come in and wanting to, through PUD, you want to have these apartment complexes, apartment buildings on these small parcels, which does present a challenge. And I, for one, and I have to say this in the meeting, I look at, I know they want a higher density, and I think higher density is a good thing. But I also think of livability. And some of the developments we've been getting, I kind of question whether the livability, there's not much open space. There's no way of people being outdoors while they're living in this particular complexes. And so, but nonetheless, we've agreed on unanimously. Some we've, had a split vote, and the city council, in the cases of PUDs, have voted to their desire for these kinds of developments. The other thing is, I've been on this planning commission for many, many years, and over the years, what we notice is that our shopping centers, some of our shopping centers are very tired, both structurally, and we know the dynamics that are going on in our post-COVID with people, buying things online. That certainly has impacted our shopping centers as well. So we need to think about how do we redevelop, aside from Lakeside, which is, another category altogether. How do we address redevelopment in our shopping centers to make them more viable? Or is there adaptive reuses of these centers? Speaking of adaptive reuse, one of the things that we want to address is the whole area of offices. Now, while we don't want to get rid of all office development in the community and the zoning and whatnot, because who knows what the future is going to hold. We may be getting a need for offices. But in the meantime, with these buildings that are no longer being used or underutilized, perhaps there's an opportunity for adaptive reuse of these buildings, whether it's residential or a different type of commercial or institutional kinds of uses. So I think we need to be thinking about all those things as we develop the plan, the master plan, so that we can, we're looking to the future, but we're also looking at what are the trends and dynamics that are going on right now. So just a few thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Appreciate your comments. Mr. Inks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Returning to the topic of PUDs, I think one of the causes for the tension or the challenges that we face with PUDs is especially in the mixed-use areas. The master plan, as currently worded focuses on mixed use in a vertical sense rather than a horizontal sense. And in a lot of the PUDs that we've seen coming into either the mixed use nodes or mixed use along North Van Dyke, they've been characterizing the plan as mixed use in a horizontal sense, talking about, mixed use between the parcel that they're trying to develop and the parcels adjacent to them. So I hope that with the master plan update, one of the things that we look at, and one of the things that I would like to look at, is changing the emphasis from only vertical mixed use in our mixed use nodes and the mixed use overlay districts to also having an express contemplation for horizontal mixed use. I think that will resolve a lot of the challenges and tension that we've faced, especially with the PUDs that have been coming in. And I do have other comments, but not on PUDs, so if you want to go to anybody else on that for now.
Well, I can come back to you if anybody else wants to speak on the PUDs. Mrs. Zarko?
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I would really like, as I'm listening to some of the decisions that a planning commission would have to make on some of these issues, is what part does administration have in advising that petitioner before they ever get to the meeting? And that would be, this isn't successful. I mean, is this advice that they give to these developers before they reach the meeting, and it's up to them to take their chances once they get there, and then it's like, let's make a deal, and that's what, it shouldn't be that way. So if we could have administration explain how they would approach somebody that would not be compliant with the way our zoning, our planning is right now, and how this petitioner might move forward anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
So staff tries to put as many safeguards as possible in place to meet with the developer and have, quite honestly, candid plan evaluation meetings to before they move forward. Mr. Fox, before I started, has done a great job starting what we call a general development meeting. This includes representatives from planning, city development, building, fire, engineering, and we all have it every Thursday morning and invite a developer to come in if they have a plan, provide them with feedback and help fine-tune the plan to ensure that it would meet site plan requirements, and recommend different changes they may make before they move in the process. That way we can kind of prepare the project for planning commission. We also have a process called the pre-preliminary site plan review. It's a free service we offer where we take a plan in, route it to different departments that may have a review on it and do a formal review on it, providing a letter back to the applicant. That way they can either choose to take in our considerations based on our code of ordinances and our master land use plan, or choose not to. And sometimes what may be dictated there is not what the market dictates, and we have to meet with them again to have a future discussion of what is going to be feasible. Ultimately, though, it comes down to the developer. So we have several safeguards in place to work with them and meet with them ahead of time, provide as thorough input as we're able to do, and then hopefully come to you with a really well thought out project. And sometimes we really do have a wonderful project that we're excited to show you.
So I guess that answers my question, because we do a lot of prep before it ever gets to the Planning Commission or the Zoning Board of Appeals, but it depends on the developer whether they're going to challenge what we have in place. And sometimes it does make it difficult for who's ever making that decision.
Yeah, I've had meetings with developers since my first day in City Hall, and I've been here almost 6 months now, and Planning Commission hasn't even seen that on an agenda yet. We're still working through it with the developers. So we have as many safeguards as possible in place to meet with them, be entirely transparent about the intention of our master land use plan and our zoning ordinance, and finding ways to make sure the projects are feasible.
Okay, and I guess my other thought would be, so if they don't listen to, or I should say they choose to go another direction than what we would like them to, then it really isn't up to the Planning Commission to go and tell them how they make those changes.
It depends on the process. The PUD process is unique, in particular if we're discussing that, because it allows for modifications to the zoning ordinance. In times, those are to help facilitate development on something that may be a unique parcel or something that is, a little more high density and something that we're hoping gives us a quality development in turn. If there's something that is, incredibly easy to address or maybe changed, there's options to postpone the meeting and bring it back to Planning Commission. And hearing concerns about that, I think staff could be more proactive in recommending that as well if we see a meeting going that way and making sure that before it gets to council, we have all of our time to review this.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further.
Dr. Parcell, if you could stay there, to piggyback off that, I think what Ms. Zarko was focusing on was a situation where maybe you're meeting with the developer, you're giving them feedback, and then they just say, well, we're not going to listen to that, we're just going to go our separate way and just try to ram it through planning. But I sort of see it differently. And I see, and it could be a combination of both of these different options happening, but it seems like the flip side of that is that maybe you work for months and months and months and come to an agreement with the developer on a proposal that may seem viable, that may have a number of variances from what we would normally allow, but planning seems comfortable with it. But then the Planning Commission's job is to review that themselves, and they are a representation of our community, a representation of the homeowners in our city, and they might see it differently. So I don't necessarily see it as the developer kind of going off the reservation away from what they've discussed with planning, and I don't see it as the Planning Commission necessarily rejecting something reasonable. It's that they're doing their job. And so it might be a situation where the developer and the planning department has come to some sort of an agreement, but the Planning Commission disagrees, right?
There's certainly any of the instances that you discussed are possible.
Right. So either way, what I think Mr. Garapi is getting at, and what I think maybe other members of the Planning Commission and the City Council have mentioned as well, Mr. Yanez, is that when that happens, and so then the developer is listening to the Planning Commissioner's feedback, and then modifying the plan before it comes to the City Council.
Yeah.
Can you comment on the value, as Mr. Garapi said, of having it go back through another round of Planning Commission review? Is that a viable option? Time is of the essence for these developers, and the Planning Commission meets just once a month. We meet obviously just twice a month. But a lot of times, depending on sequencing, it can throw projects off by weeks or months. So do you see a way of resolving that? And can you comment on a couple people who've said, should it go back to Planning Commission rather than come to the City Council with wholesale changes?
Yeah. Something that staff's been working on internally that we're hoping to kind of implement in reviewing a planned unit development or a large project like this is doing a checklist, showing a little more explicitly overall how the project meets what's in our code and what the modifications are and meets the intent of the master plan. There's times where we're very comfortable moving it forward to council with some review. We've had one that's now back because of some other property changes. That the only changes were changing in siding and adding some potential texturing and parapets in the entryways. That's something where if it's changed, I'm very comfortable saying this can go to council with these changes. Planning Commission had a very clear direction with this, and it brings the site up to a very standard that I'm comfortable with you guys reviewing. I think a lot of it will come down to discretion of staff and working with the developer, though. When it comes to this, if there's something that is so dire that Planning Commission needs this review, we're happy to work with them to postpone it, meet with the developer again and refresh it. And if we have to call a special meeting and work with our attorneys to schedule that and notice it properly, we're happy to use that at our disposal as well. Planning Commission does a wonderful, thorough job in reviewing these projects, and there will be times where that may be the case. And the best we can do is be as developer-friendly as possible in regards to their timeline. If it does make sense that they're able to wait, say they own the property already and they're starting to come on to some discovery of a project they want to do, we're comfortable moving them back an agenda, reworking the staff report and bringing them into another general development meeting. And if it's something that staff can determine is relatively negligible in terms of materials change or small changes like that, then I'm happy to work with them independently and move them to council after that. So it's a constantly flowing timeline of changes that we want to pay as most respects as possible as their timeline as well. And a lot of it will come down to discretion of us and how willing we are to get the changes made that Planning Commission directs.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Mrs. Schmidt.
Thank you. First of all, I'm of the opinion that if a developer purchases a piece of property that isn't zoned for what they plan on doing, they are taking a chance that they may not be able to rezone that property. It's not our responsibility to necessarily hand the keys of the kingdom over to a developer because they happen to take a chance on a piece of property. I also think that, you know, to say, you know, developers are on tight timelines, I understand building has, you know, in Michigan, we have limited time for building. However, it's not a reason for us to push something through or feel the pressure to get this done and not postpone it or not continue to ask questions. I think that if if we continue the way we are with Planning Commission approving or disapproving, and it automatically comes to us with significant changes, like I can recall a particular case in the last year that happened, I think administration needs to be extremely clear when it gets to council what changes have been made since the Planning Commission has heard the case and denied or approved the case. So that's my 2 cents on the PUDs.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Schmidt. Anyone else?
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Wright?
my problem is how many times are you going to let it come back before the Planning Commission before it gets old? Because usually they come, they know right away if we're going to approve or deny. We usually offer them a chance to postpone. They do, they come back. Even that second time, if we don't like it and we deny it, I mean, are they going to come back a third, a fourth? How many chances are they going to get for us to say that we like it? I know in the past, and you've heard me, I think probably the same plan that you were talking about, they changed it drastically from the Planning Commission meeting to when they came to City Council. And so I actually went up there and I said, if this had come through to the Planning Commission, I would have approved it instead of denying it. So maybe instead of creating a whole nother meeting for them to come back, just polling the planning commissioners and seeing, emailing us and say, hey, will you take a look at these changes or do something? Because I don't see having yet a third or a fourth meeting to go over these changes. It just seems like a lot.
Well, look, I think any one of the members of the city council has, after something has been decided by the planning commission, I think any one of the members of the city council is within their rights, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Koszubski, to reach out to a planning commissioner or to a member of the ZBA and say, what do you think of these revisions? You know, if you're a recommending body and there have been changes, you know, I'm not so sure how I feel about doing it in mass, putting you all on an email thread and saying each one of you vote, tell me how you would vote. You know, but
More informal reaching out is what I was talking about.
But if we reach out and we have discussions and keep the conversation going, that may be one way. Mr. Koszubski, anything you want to add there?
Mayor, obviously putting everybody on an email chain and having them comment all at once would be a bad idea from the Open Meetings Act perspective, but I do think that council members have the ability to talk to a commissioner after the decisions have been made, independently if they wish to get their thoughts.
Okay. Mr. Radke.
Just briefly, I have one question. If it came to the city, if a plan came to the city council that was drastically different, could city council refer it back to the planning commission to have them give us an opinion if we think it's significantly changed?
That is correct, Mr. Radke. You have that option.
That was my question, yeah.
Mr. Yanez.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because what I was going to say was, when you look at what we do on a regular basis as city council, you know, we're handing out awards, we're talking about backyard chickens, we're, you know, doing budget talks, and then, oh yeah, here's this PUD that hopefully you did your homework on, and you're supposed to make a decision like right now, where the planning commission, the zoning board, that's what they do. That's all they do. And I think it really, I don't want to say it's incumbent upon them, but I think they carry more weight when it comes to issues like the PUD before it gets to city council, and this, I think, you know, I don't know how many times it has to go back. Maybe we should make a rule that it can only go back one time. I don't know. To your point, and I said this, Mr. Mayor, is that, either watch the meeting. I know people on the planning commission. I've actually made those phone calls and asked what the heck happened with this particular project. But the fact of the matter is, city council, PUDs, approving or disapproving PUDs is one of many things we do in a meeting, one of many. They focus on planning, and that's it. And that's why I think it's important that, well, I don't know if they have the final word, but I think what they say weighs more than anything else. So.
Mr. Vanderpool, when exactly was the last master land use plan adopted? 2017. So it was adopted in 2017. And do you recall when the process of reviewing it and getting it drafted and getting it reviewed, when did that process start, if you couldn't recall?
2012. It took a good close to a year.
So it took close to a year. So kind of my point with that is that, so we started that process in 2016. And if you go back in time to then, in 2016, we were coming out of the Great Recession. I think housing prices probably had bottomed out around 2012 or 2013 and started turning around. And so we're just a couple of years into an increasing housing market at that time. Commercial properties were probably not, or I should say, office properties were probably not as bad as they are now, pre-pandemic. Commercial properties were probably recovering pretty strongly at that point, after going through 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12 with high vacancies. And so I think part of the issue is that we have a different set of priorities community-wide right now. We have a different landscape that we're dealing with. And I think that's part of why the master land use plan is not necessary, or like what the city council's priorities and maybe the planning commission's priorities and the community's priorities might not be aligned with what our documents say. And I've made comments to that effect, that, we've got to look at this housing crisis that we have. We've got to look at the fact that developers have commercial properties that are not being utilized, that are underutilized, too much parking. There's no need for new office space. So this is, I think, precisely why we're going through this exercise right now, and why we need this input for the new master plan. And that maybe when that happens, hopefully when that happens, that will correct many of the issues that we're addressing right now. That if we can work together to sync up our zoning ordinance with our master plan, then there'll be a lot more clarity for developers, and hopefully we won't be in this position where we're having to kind of adapt, I should say, on the fly. Because that's been my concern, is that when developers come in and they say, look, we've got this piece of property, we want to, it seems like we're shoving a lot of housing into a small area, but meanwhile, we're hearing all of the headlines nationally and from people locally as well. I mean, we hear from people locally that they can't buy a house in Sterling Heights, that they grew up in Sterling Heights, they want to live in Sterling Heights, but they can't afford Sterling Heights. So I'm hoping that this process helps us get into a place where we have a synced up zoning ordinance and master plan, and that the council and the planning commission and the ZBA are on the same page with our priorities. So hopefully that does come out of this. Anyone else on this? Mr. Garapi.
Just to sort of echo a couple of things, Mr. Mayor. I think that after we approved the master plan in 2017, one of the areas where we fell short was actually codifying it into law. And I think that that's something that we need to take and make a concerted effort towards this time around. Another thing about PUDs and the approval process, one of the other things that the Planning Commission does, of course, is the special approval land uses. And Mr. Koszubski can correct me if I'm wrong, but if the Planning Commission says no on an SALU, that decision is binding. Whereas with a PUD, if we say no on it, it still goes right past us, and then the council gets to hear it. I think that that's probably part of the problem that we're experiencing here, is that we should probably consider, and I'm not sure that I know all of the ramifications of this, so I'm not going to state it as an iron rule or anything, but I think that we should consider that maybe the Planning Commission has a very good idea of what does and doesn't work from a planning perspective, and that our decisions on PUDs should be as binding as they are for SALUs. Now, does that work within the legal framework of the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act? I don't know. Okay, that's where we need an attorney to weigh in and look at what's possible. But what I do think is that if you give us more of an opportunity to have the final word, then there will be a greater impetus on the part of the developers to work with us and try to come to an agreeable solution. And one final point that I want to make, I liked what you said earlier about how, you know, the planning commissioners in a way represent the residents just as much as the elected members of council do. And I think that there's a truism here that everybody in this room that's involved in these processes, in my mind, the city is sort of a pet project in a way. It's something that I'm emotionally attached to. I want to see the city thrive. I want to see the city progress. I want to see the city continue to be relevant in the greater area that we live in. It's something that is important to me, and I don't think that anybody here is any different. We just have different parts to play in and roles to fill, you know, in driving towards that ultimate goal. So I appreciate that. You know, you told me when I first joined those years ago that you expected me to come in and do what I thought was right. And I think that I've held up my end on that bargain, and I think that all the planning commissioners do. So I feel very strongly that we're ready to, you know, take on the work of making final decisions wherever it's possible and feasible under the law.
Thank you, Mr. Garapi. I appreciate that, and I appreciate that you do, in my opinion, act in the way that you think is right, and the rest of the planning commissioners do. I'm not sure I agree with you that we should lose the final authority from the city council, but you know, we can all, everybody's a little bit territorial.
Think of it as a right of first refusal more than just a final yes or no.
We can
obviously you
explore
guys still write the ordinances, right?
Right.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Weekai.
I'll make it real briefly. Listen, I thank all of you because you, all of you as a council and mayor place our trust in us as a planning commission and the zoning board of appeals to make the best decisions. However, we promote all the changes and friendly developing, then we shouldn't be as harsh to developer when it comes in front of us that looks, and if you don't do this, you don't get it, and that's it. If we're going to be more friendly developing community, we need to be kind of a little more understanding. And I think Dr. Parcell does a great job and his team by making that. Secondly, I remember a case that we made an approval recommendation, and when it got to council, it didn't happen, and it came right back. And then with the changes they had, we gave a no recommendation, and it still didn't make it to the council. So, I mean, whatever, in the PUD topic, I believe that you should have the final say, and that's why I said it even this before. Look, we trimmed it, and the final say is city council, and I'm comfortable with that. But one final thing, the faster we change the master plan and combine the zoning ordinance, I think we're going to resolve a lot of these issues.
Okay, thank you. I think we had a good discussion about the PUD, and I'm happy to entertain more on that if anybody wants to, but it's sort of leaving our zoning board of appeals members shut out. I want to open it up to you guys if you do have any questions or comments about any of the presentations that were made today or just anything in general. Yes, Mr. Graff.
I have a question about what Councilman Yanis brought up about the electric vehicles and the charging stations and things like that. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Parcells, but I was looking at our zoning ordinances and I see absolutely nothing about charging stations, about where they can be, where they cannot be, or anything else. Also, if we do implement multiple charging stations in our city, have we consulted with DTE whether it'll be a strain on our grid or not? Because the last thing we want to have is a rolling blackout like we hear like in California and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. This is something that obviously will take a great amount of research and coordination with regional authorities, something that the city is beginning to work on in terms of our long-term planning and visioning, something that we've been discussing a great deal as well. The thing about the ordinance is technology changes sometimes quite rapidly, and the ordinance takes a while to update to keep up, and it takes a lot of research to do so. But this is underway. There is collaboration with local energy providers as well, and staff and administration is spending a lot of time reviewing this to make sure we have a great solution.
Thank you. I was just worried about the first case that comes across before us, and we have no standing for it, so.
Yeah, definitely. Yep, it's underway.
Thank you very much.
Mrs. Zarko.
Just to add a little more to that, recently I asked, I might have asked Dr. Parcell, but I asked how many charging stations we had in Sterling Heights, and we didn't have an answer. But I did find out there are 29 charging stations in the county, and 2 more are being built on M59 right now. So that gives you an idea of how many. We might not have more than 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Vanderpool reports we have 4.
4?
4 in the whole city. Interesting. Thank you, Mr. Graff. Anybody else? Anyone else on any other comments or questions that they had? Mr. Rowe?
Yes, I'm glad you brought in the Zoning Board of Appeals question and comments. Something that we did, we had a joint meeting at the ZBA and the Planning Commission many, many years ago, and this was really effective, in conjunction with the staff. And that is, and I'm speaking of the zoning ordinance itself, if there's a common set of cases that come before the Zoning Board of Appeals repeatedly, then that raises a red flag that perhaps the zoning ordinance needs to be amended, that kind of thing. And I know over the years, many years, with the planning staff, they bring things to our attention. But again, it's the Zoning Board of Appeal members who feel that the same way, that we keep getting this similar cases all the time. And we've passed them, perhaps, in most cases. But what we need to do is really consider changing the zoning ordinance provisions so that we don't have to have these, these kind of cases come before us. Not that I want them to, reduce the number of caseload for them. I mean, that's what they do.
They only go till 2 a.m.
But anyway, I think that was a very good exercise we did years ago, and it proved that at that time, we really did need to amend the zoning ordinance in a couple of cases because Zoning Board of Appeals is driven crazy with these individual common cases. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. We saw during the summer and I believe fall of 2022 or throughout 2022, a number of PUD cases come back to back to back, and many of them were very similar in nature. And I think some of the issues that were being addressed, like, required minimum parking, I don't think anybody on the city council really had any issue with that, but, that we would see similar themes, like they want a variance for parking, they want a variance for recreational space, density. And so those things, if every development is doing that, that's precisely, I think, the point of what we're doing here today is to get that feedback and incorporate it into our master plan and then give it the force of law. So I agree with that. Anyone else?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Inks.
I was actually going to ask a question about this. I was reading through the zoning ordinance a couple weeks ago, reviewing for this meeting, and realized there's a provision in the ordinance that says that the Planning Commission is supposed to perform a comprehensive review of the ordinance every 3 years. Through the mayor to either Mr. Koszubski or somebody from Office of Planning, do you know the last time that Planning Commission did that and when we're scheduled to do it again?
Mr. Koszubski.
Thank you, Mr. Inks. That's a great question. You actually forwarded it to me in an email, so I got some research going, and I looked at the ordinance. I think you're mistaken in the interpretation of the ordinance. The ordinance really places the responsibility on the Planning Commission to do a comprehensive review of the zoning ordinance periodically. It is not a 3-year window. It says that it really says that you can't, if you do a review, you have to wait another 3 years before you do another review, but there's no timeline for when you want to do it or how you do it or when. Going back in time, the history when this was adopted, about 30 years ago, it was a new ordinance. And when you do a comprehensive review, it's a heavy lift. You usually hire consultants, you come to council for a budget, and you go through that process. With that said, however, our zoning ordinance has been amended and updated almost yearly as issues arise. With the master planning in 2017, for example, that brought forward the vision of mixed-use nodes and the Van Dyke district. And all of that was adopted and does have the force of law. Those were the updates that were done during the time that that master plan was updated. So when the next master plan comes, we'll be doing the same thing. So while the Planning Commission has the ability to do that, we have been, since 30 years ago when this thing was adopted and the zoning ordinance was adopted, there's been multiple updates from various uses, expanding uses, for instance, salons with microblading, something nobody knew existed 10 years ago. Right now, we've changed those ordinances to address those issues as they've come forward, either through Planning Commission, through the Planning Department, through developers, or through City Council themselves. So we've continually updated our ordinances. Is there more to be done after we do this master plan? And I'm sure there will be.
Thank you. And then a question for the Office of Planning. On the topic of the mixed-use developments, I think ensuring a proper balance of parking in mixed-use nodes, whether those are the actual traditional mixed-use nodes, North Van Dyke Avenue, or even Lakeside, is going to be crucial to ensuring that those districts develop in a successful way, ensuring that we're not overparked and that we're not underparked in those areas. What role do you see the city playing in ensuring a proper balance of parking in our mixed-use areas, whether that's working with individual developers on parking sharing agreements or the city actually coming in and having city-owned parking lots? I guess what role do you see the city playing there?
Yeah, at council a few weeks ago, we discussed a parking study. And there's a wide variety of things that may come from that study, and it will definitely be a part of the future update to the master land use plan. In particular, Mayor Taylor said it best, the developer knows their project and the parking required more than we will. So if it comes to making modifications through the PUD or development process, we're open to that. We're also open to finding creative solutions for that, such as land banking spaces like the Flats has proposed. That way, if we find that they're severely underparked after they're developed and leased out, there's the opportunity to open up spaces in the future by carving into some, unused developable land. So there's options and there's creative solutions to address this. We are all for shared access parking, particularly as we start to chain some developments together in some of these nodes. And when you look at a node, something we discussed, why I really like the concept of a node is strategic planning is horizontal mixed use. That includes tying different uses together, even if they are standalone in a structure. So that kind of blurs the lines of what parking requirements are in our code already. And we're open for finding solutions to that as we begin this process as well. But everything will be incredibly grassroots, research-based, based on meeting with the business community and developers, and our recommendations will reflect what we find in that process.
All right, thank you. Nothing further.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Inks. Anyone else on anything tonight?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Radke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have some brief comments that I wrote previously, and then some ideas have come to me while here. One thing I would say about the mixed-use nodes, I think they have the most potential in our city to really be transformative. But they're going to require strict design standards to be successful. Because right now, our zoning ordinance is kind of silent on how they're supposed to develop and in what way they're supposed to develop. So there's this idea that somehow there's a developer who's going to read our minds and just come with this magic development that's going to fit all of our criterion and then be put up. And it makes it very difficult for us, and it makes it very difficult for developers to read our mind. They have their own idea about what their property can do. I recently read the city of East Point has gone through a comprehensive plan for 9 Mile, they're going to make it a boulevard, 9 Mile Boulevard, 9 Mile Road in their city. And they have strict standards that they're going to hold developers to when they redevelop buildings. Now, if a building's already there, it can maintain the use in the same structure as it already has. But the plan, which I urge everyone here to read, makes some severe changes to how the street will function. One, any new building that demolishes a building must be brought to the street, must be a minimum of 2 stories. The entrance must be on the street. You can have side entrances, but the main and parking must be alongside or behind. And all parking has to be separated from pedestrian areas with what they call a knee wall or some kind of way to separate what is a parking area from a pedestrian area. They're also going to close driveways and make it more so that pedestrians can walk down 9 Mile Road. They're going to create on-street parking on 9 Mile. And that kind of, if you think about this, they're telling developers, if you want to redevelop on 9 Mile, this is what you must do. And I think that that gives developers more of a sure thing too, because right now, if they go to 9 Mile and they say, I want to put a highly pedestrian style building and put it right on the street, you're going to be all by yourself. And it'll take time to develop, but if they don't feel the city's going to back them up on it, they're never going to come forward with that development. But if they know that the neighboring buildings, when they redevelop, are going to be in a similar situation, they're going to be more likely to take that leap. And that's what most other cities like Ann Arbor, Royal Oak, Ferndale, as they're developing their mixed-use areas, they have strict standards. Birmingham says that glass must be clear, that displays must be lit till 10 p.m. at night. They have strict standards on how their downtown or their mixed-use areas appear to the public. And right now, our zoning code is almost completely silent on these things. And I think that that's what's led to a lot of the problems that we're having. And while I appreciate that we should have horizontal mixed use, you know, we're trying to create, especially the North Van Dyke corridor, they call it the building wall, this idea, because it separates the public from the private. Behind the buildings is the private, in front of the buildings is the public. And if you have buildings of at least a size, 2 stories, you're telling people what you expect to be there. And I think it's necessary. So I'm happy that we're going to do some sub-plans for Lakeside and for North Van Dyke. And I think we should do something for the Nose. But we should set strict standards on what is to be developed there. The rest of the city is still going to be the same pattern it always has been. But for the Nodes, we expect something different. And we should ask developers to come with these different ideas. And that'll kind of give them a little bit more of certainty too. I mean, number one, we should ban any type of drive-through or vehicular use in the Nodes. Now, if they already are there, if they already have a gas station or a car wash or whatever, we can't make them leave. But we should be actively preventing them from reestablishing themselves in what is supposed to be a mixed-use corridor. Because no one wants to go to a coffee shop and then dodge 3 rows of traffic through Chick-fil-A on, North Hall Road to get across someplace else. It's not going to be pedestrian friendly. It's going to prevent people from actually seeing the vision that we have. To talk about that, once we have the master plan, I would really like us to really evaluate our zoning ordinance and collapse the zones. Now, we have R60, R80, R120. We have C1, C2, C3. And I understand them because I sit up here all day. And I think most developers' lawyers understand them because they get paid big bucks to do it. But I think the average person or the average developer or average person who wants to be a developer, they have no clue. And I think it makes it almost overly complicated. And that's what creates this special land use approval, these weird differing ideas, because we're not making it simple enough for people to do. I read a study that said the average commercial space in London or New York or other cities is 1,000 square feet or less. To be a successful business, you don't need to have 30,000 square feet to be a successful business. You can have it smaller. And these nodes are the areas to experiment with that. We're not going to change our entire development pattern overnight. But within the zones, we can say that this is something different for people. To go on top of that, I think that municipal parking lots might be the solution to at least the North Van Dyke corridor. This is where cars park. This is where cars don't. And then we talked earlier about ADUs, which I'm strongly in favor of, and missing middle housing, which I'm strongly in favor of. But I've walked the city from top to bottom. In almost every neighborhood, the city provides free on-street parking to residents that I would say is used maybe 20% of the time, if not less. So the idea that we need to have more parking for ADUs or more parking for mixed middle housing is false. The parking already exists. The city pays for it. We plow it. We stripe it, we do everything for it, and people get to use it for free. And it's there. And the benefit of that is if they use it, it'll slow down speeds in our neighborhoods too. Because places that have more on-street parking have slower speeds in residential areas. It kind of goes hand in hand. Oh, and then to go with special approval land use, I honestly think that the Planning Commission has too much special approval land uses that come before them. I think a lot of them are just figurative or just basically simple, and it ends up being a costly process for our businesses and a time sink for people. Right now, if you want to change your business hours, you have to file a couple $100, schedule an appointment, come before the meeting, and what, a bakery, I want to be open till 10 p.m. Okay, you can be open till 10 p.m. Now, I've spent all this time and all this money doing this. I think we should establish some business hours that make sense in our community, maybe 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. If you want to function between those hours, sure. And the city can do that administratively. And if you want to go outside those hours, then sure, you should come to the Planning Commission. But I don't need the Planning Commission weighing in if a bakery can stay open until 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. It's silly and it's counterproductive. It's a waste of everyone's time and it's expensive. And I've seen it before. I watched the meetings. They go up there and they say, well, I want to open an hour earlier. And you'll go, do you want to open 2 hours earlier? We can just change it. They go, no, I want an hour. And they go, no, we'll change it to 2 hours. So if you ever want to move it back again, you don't have to come before us. It's not necessary. It's not needed. I think that the city planner, or the assistant city planner, Mr. Purcell and his staff, can set hours that make sense for most businesses, and that we don't need to be wading into how late you can keep your business open. To go along with that, I think the COVID pandemic has taught us that a lot of the patios that we had in the city aren't a problem. And right now, there's a stringent process if you're a business, if you want to move out onto the pedestrian area, or if you want to establish seating outside. And I think we could pare that back and make it a much simpler process. Because I think that I haven't seen a problem. I haven't had any complaints. I guess through the chair to Mr. Vanderpool or Mr. Koszewski. During the COVID pandemic, did we have complaints about outdoor seating or outdoor anything?
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Radke, no, we really didn't. And that's certainly on our list of things to relax and change through this process. There's no question that there's a great need to be more flexible with some of these uses, not only for restaurants, but even for some retail establishments, boutiques, and the like, to be able to move out on the sidewalk with fewer bureaucratic hurdles.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that because thinking about it, I haven't heard of a complaint. And if it's not, no one's complaining, why do we have a very time-intensive and severe process to approve something that no one is having a problem with? I'm going to go backward to my notes. Let's see. Sorry, I'm going to read through all my notes. Yeah, and so to kind of speak off what I already said, you know, in the mixed-use zones, we need to ban things like car washes, dealerships, gas stations, drive-throughs, businesses that are solely based upon the automobile. And I see several businesses as I drive around the city now that have basically gone to drive-through only without explicitly saying they're drive-through only. I see fast food places that have just basically locked their, maybe for lack of staff, maybe for lack, it's profitable to be a drive-through, let's be honest here. They do not want customers inside their businesses, and they just lock the doors and say drive-through only. And if we're not saying that's explicit, I mean, I remember when I was growing up in Sterling Heights, it was a fight to get a drive-through. And now it's almost a fait accompli. And more than that, you know, we talked about, you know, the Hall Road area. Our ordinance says that a drive-through can't co-locate with another drive-through. There's supposed to be so much space between drive-through based businesses. And we've kind of just put that over the wayside. And people are just, you know, going, you know, back to back to back to back with drive-through businesses. And the Hall Road corridor is a place for drive-throughs. Don't get me wrong, it is. But I think we need to be more, we need to think harder about how is this affecting both nearby businesses And how is it affecting how people are accessing the area? Because a drive-through line creates pollution. It creates, I think, a condition that I wouldn't want to be near. I mean, I drive past that Chick-fil-A in Shelby Township, and I think it's awful. I would never vote to approve it here, because I think that it creates a situation where you have 3 rows of cars stacked, you have tons of idling vehicles, and they're purposely downplaying that you can go inside the business. They don't want you inside their business. They want you to go out in your car. So I think we really need to think about that. I know this is probably on our agenda, but we need to eliminate the RV parking requirement, which drives me absolutely nuts. We always disregard it. It shouldn't be in the ordinance. I don't know anyone who lives in a condo that has an RV they want to park out back. So it kind of goes hand in hand. And then one thing, watching the ZBA, I think we should talk about gazebos, of all things. Attaching structures to your structure. Because right now it's illegal in Sterling Heights. And you can go to Costco and buy a $1,000 gazebo and put it up in your yard without any, you don't need to pull a permit. You don't need, I mean, you should, but you don't. They don't. You don't need to hire a handyman. You can do it yourself. And so now we have all these gazebos that are clearly against the code of ordinances, but which people enjoy. And I've seen several of them come before the ZBA, and it becomes kind of a mishmash. And we need to really start thinking about our ordinance making sense for how people are living. Because I don't really care if you have a gazebo or not. I honestly think our setbacks are insane. We should really alter our setback requirements. Because it was explained to me when I first got elected, we have setbacks to prevent collapses and things like that. And I would say, when was the last time a building collapsed in Sterling Heights? When was the last time we needed these severe setbacks, which kind of really eliminate how people can use their land? So let's give people their land back. Let's give them the power to build on their land the way they want. I don't care if someone has a gazebo in their backyard. I don't care if they build their house a little bit closer to the street. I think that in some ways our ordinance prevents us from creating that situation where people can use their land more effectively. Another thing I think about a lot, and I know I'm talking a lot, pardon me, Mr. Mayor, but it's been working out.
It's only been 13 minutes so
right.
far.
Well, I have a chance to have everybody in front of me. So other cities have things like courtyard homes, where you have 4 homes based upon a stub street that you cannot park on, but which you can access. They do this in California. They do it in Ann Arbor. I used to live right next to one. If you wanted to buy 2 R60 parcels and build 4 homes facing each other, it wouldn't really affect the neighbors, but it would create a situation where we can use housing more effectively. But under our ordinance, because of the setback requirements and because of the zoning requirements, this can't happen. It just won't happen. You'd have to PUD it all day long. But this was a development pattern that worked for hundreds of years, that we've kind of moved away from, that it's effective. And we really need to think about that. I guess with that, I'll yield back until I have another idea. Mr. Mayor.
Move to adjourn. Maybe. No, we still have citizen participation. And we do have citizens. Just we've got one. I've heard the door open and close a couple times, but he's been here. Anyone else on any comments, questions, or feedback?
Mr. Mayor.
Mrs. Koski.
Through the chair to Dr. Purcell, if he's available. Tonight we talked about updating our master plan, which we do every 5 years. What are your thoughts on our master plan as it is right now? Where do you see that we need to make some changes? Where are we lacking? What do we need to do? What's your opinion?
Yeah, definitely. So it set a great framework that has led to the accomplishment of a lot of wonderful projects, as we highlighted a bit tonight. Where the plan, I think, is starting to become deficient is implementing or involving everything that has happened in the past 5 years, for better or worse. We're coming out of a pandemic that has drastically changed how we evaluate land use and the type of land use efficiency that's going to be needed in this city to, quite honestly, help developers make projects feasible. That leads to us readdressing different types of office and different types of commercial uses. And then also we have, in the past, just 6 months, a landmark decision from City Council to move forward with the Lakeside project that needs to be addressed much more thoroughly in the master plan to help ensure that that project is done correctly and done in a way that benefits the city for, in perpetuity. Additionally, the sustainability plan has a lot of wonderful things that need to move forward in there, and the housing needs to be evaluated at a much higher level. I think that the biggest deficiency I see in the master plan is addressing actionable items that are achievable from our boards and commissions and from our staff. This way, when we move forward on addressing development and land use, we do so with intention. We bring in the correct parties to do so, and we have a development that we're all very happily on the same page with. The framework itself is fantastic. It identified a lot of high development areas in the city, but so much has happened in the past 5 years that needs to be addressed. I think that moving forward with all of these sub-area plans and sub-plans on the same page, it really positions us to move forward in creating a very, development-friendly city and a city that's friendly for the residents.
How do you see our preserving our neighborhoods?
Yeah, as we mentioned in our presentation, master planning is a safeguard. Planning Commission said this quite fantastically at the first meeting when we reviewed it. Identifying our neighborhoods that have, that are the backbone and foundation of Sterling Heights is important. Giving them recognition as what they contribute to the community is something that's going to be hopefully involved in the master plan. And preserving the areas where single-family housing is best for these neighborhoods is going to be involved in our housing study as well. When we choose ways to enhance our neighborhoods through ADUs or different types of pattern book homes, increasing development intensity in the neighborhoods to help create different types of housing units, that has to be done intentionally as well in areas that don't infringe upon our existing neighborhoods. That way we preserve our existing housing stock, celebrate it through the master plan process, and then move forward with development in areas that can withstand increased intensity.
I've always believed that the master plan is, as you said, our vision for the future of Sterling Heights. And of course, our residents to me are the most important. So I want to make sure that we don't infringe on their rights. Now, you're going to be collecting input from the residents. Are you going to be looking at some of the petitioners, some of the issues that have been brought to the zoning board and to the planning commission as to changes that we need to make either in planning or zoning? Is that one source of information that you're going to have?
Yeah, I agree that that will be something we look at. Also, through the working with the community, it's a great way to create an educational process as well. Information can flow both ways that way, both educating staff and boards and commissions on what we want in the plan, but also helping to clear any barriers that we have with anyone in the public that has questions about what the city is envisioning moving forward too. This way, these charrettes can be incredibly informative two-way information sessions. And hopefully then, when you have people come to meetings, it's in favor overwhelmingly of the projects based on all the work that we put into the master plan, and they can be celebrated at city council as they're approved.
Mixed use.
Yes.
I would sure like to see written guidelines, mixed use. Is that a possibility?
I would love that as well, so hopefully it is.
Can you write it? Will you write it?
Gladly
Is
work
that
on
something
that.
on your to-do list?
Yeah, definitely. So in my eyes, good planning is a process, and as we mentioned, it's quite a long one. But with the new master plan, the time and resources we're spending on this is to set the next stage of this planning process to bring everything onto the same page. This pulls together all these sub-area plans, it pulls together all this development identity onto the same page, and then we create a code of ordinances that enforces this and gives it some teeth. That way we remove any subjectivity, we make sure that everything is in lockstep, and then hopefully, for years to come, every May, I have all of you in the same room again and we can do this again, and instead of, going back to the bare bones of the master planning process, talk about what we're doing next and, alleviating any questions and then kind of recapping all the wonderful things we did the year before. So it's a long process, and I agree that we'll have to definitely work on some more ordinance changes and policies as well.
You will add the PUD to that so that we can then next year go through and critique that and say, change this, change that.
Yeah, we're open for any type of comment, criticism, or critique on anything that we have as a process right now as a way to better it for our developers and for our residents, and that's something I'd love to address.
Well, my request is put both of those in writing.
I'll start to work on that.
In the old days, and Mr. Rowe can attest to this, we don't have a downtown because we had a downtown on every single corner along with a gas station. I don't want to go back to that. I don't want to see that happen again. I like the vision that we have and the direction that we're going. The only thing that I have to disagree with one of my colleagues is I don't want 0 lot lines. I don't want that storefront right on the edge of that 10-foot sidewalk and then step into the road and all the parking in the back. 0 lot line, to me, is not the way I would like to see this city go. Because we take pride in the maintenance of our buildings, of our homes. We want them to be appealing. How can you maintain your property if you have a 0 lot line?
It's really, when you look at something like that in a design guidelines, is about finding where it's most feasible and then finding a developer to work with in that area. It's not something that we envision being throughout the city. In all of our zoning ordinances, we'll still maintain setbacks as required, similar to what we have currently. But when this comes into these kind of more flexible mixed-use nodes, land's going to be at a premium. So allowing this flexibility and working with the developers is an option that we'd like to keep open. But it's all about really finding where we can do it and where it's feasible to do it. And that's hopefully what the research will uncover for us.
When you have a situation like that, remember to look at the big picture. If you have a 0 lot line, you better get permission from the property next door. You better record that easement so that it runs with the life of the land. If you have to maintain it, you have to go onto your neighbor's property. You better make sure that he agrees to it, puts it in writing, and records it. That's my opinion.
That's a great point. And it's something that we're starting to evaluate, especially with access to some of these larger parcels as well. And something that I look forward to, educating myself a bit more about as we move forward with the development as well.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing your drafts when you get them put together so that we have a little bit of time to critique them for you.
That's perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Koski. Being mindful of everyone's time tonight, we were hoping to get everyone in and out by 9. We've had a good discussion. I don't want to necessarily cut it off. If you haven't had an opportunity to speak and you do want to speak, I want to open it up to you. If there's anybody who has any final comments, who's already spoken, briefly, I'm happy to give you the floor again.
Mayor Taylor.
Mrs. Sarowski.
Thank you. Just some comments more than questions, so I do appreciate this. I will keep them brief, however. So I do want to say that I am really interested to see, and I appreciate that Mrs. Koski and even Mr. Radke had mentioned the nodes and getting these nodes very specific. Dr. Parcells, I appreciate your comments that you are going to work on getting some of these nodes the requirements very specific, because I think that developers and even the city and even us as council people and commissioners need to know exactly what we're looking at and what the requirements are going to be and where we need to go from here. That's extremely important, because otherwise it seems to be, it's mixed use. We don't want it to be a mixed bag of tricks either. We want it to be very specific so that we know what we're going to be requiring of our developers and even the residents who are looking at this. So yes, very clear, precise, and what we need to lay the groundwork for and keep our developers in line of. I think that that's extremely important. We have heard from Mr. Radke about collapsing zoning and getting it going, getting the zoning areas reevaluated, and I have to agree with them. It's time to reevaluate all of our zoning ordinances and our zoning areas, and we need to get that done. So sooner the better, and I'm happy to do that. So I 100% agree. I'm very interested in these pattern book homes. We do not have a lot of space to develop residential properties, but I lived in a pattern book home back in Harper Woods that was built in 1941, 42, and I loved that home. It was a little bitty bungalow. It was the cutest thing in the whole wide world. Our neighbors looked exactly the same as the next and next and next and next, but it was the best little home, and it's withstood the test of time. And I'd like to see, although I don't really want to have every neighbor look the same, I think that they do have a very interesting opportunity for us. ADUs. Yes, I think ADUs are a great, I don't want to say opportunity again, but they have some, they're very interesting. I don't want to have a little granny apartment in every neighborhood and every house along the block, but, you know, the she shed, air quotes there, and the he sheds. I think that these are opportunities for us to be able to use our property. Other than I just took out my pool, I have an entire quarter-acre lot that just looks, it's beautiful grass, but maybe a little something on that land would be nice. And so I look forward to seeing what else I can do with that property. But I will say this about the additional parking, that if there is additional residences living in there, I grew up in a time, and my kids grew up in a time where you can play in the street, you're playing your baseball, you're playing your street hockey. I don't want to see a lot of cars parked on the street. It is dangerous. These kids need to have a safe place to play. Or even I'm driving down the street now, and I've got my neighbors who don't like to park in their driveway, and I feel like I'm shooting a gauntlet, and heaven forbid a dog, a cat, or a kid jumps out between those cars. I just think parking on a residential street is very dangerous, and I would really like to not see that. So I would be very much against that if at all possible. And then I think I'm going to just end it there. So thank you very much for listening to me, and those are my thoughts. Thank you, Mayor Taylor.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Sarowski. Anyone else? Anyone else?
Mayor Taylor.
Mrs. Schmidt.
Just very briefly. Through the chair to Dr. Purcell, we've talked tonight about these tired shopping centers, and every person in this room agrees that there are some shopping centers that are more tired than others. And I'm wondering if the plan is to get together the owners of these shopping centers and go over potential plans in the changes in our master plan, and what some options for them could be to make them less tired.
Yeah, so something that I really love about the master plan public feedback session is we have the ability to freeform it however we want. We have a lot of business centers in here, and something that I really want to take initiative on is pulling together business owners and having maybe even a separate charrette and separate survey online tools to gather feedback with them, specifically related to our business community, to make sure that they feel included in the process as well. Even if they own property here and they don't reside in Sterling Heights, the impacts of the master plan and zoning ordinance will impact them, their shopping center, and potentially their business. So we love all the feedback we can from them, and we're going to find some creative solutions to solicit that feedback.
And hopefully they take that into consideration and try to spruce things up or change things up. Some of those owners have had those shopping centers for decades, and they look like it. So we need some help in that area. And also, I was just wondering, I had the opportunity to see a little home community, and was wondering if anybody has approached the city as far as developing a little home community.
Not since I've been here, no.
Okay, I would kind of be excited to see if we have a place for one of those. I think when we talk about affordable housing, that's affordable housing. You know, $1,600 a month apartment is not affordable housing for me. So I was just wondering. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Schmidt. Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to close that portion, and I thank everyone who participated and everyone who didn't. Thank you as well for your attention and for being here tonight. I think that this was very productive and a great opportunity for all of us to get together and share our vision for the city and for this very, very important issue. So like I said, I will close that portion of our meeting, and the next is communications from citizens. Sir, anything tonight? Let me tell you, you're under no obligation.
Jim Bauer, husband of Wilsett Court in Sterling Heights, and after I'm done, then Mr. Yanez can make his motion to adjourn. I think this was great, that you guys all had an opportunity to come together and discuss everything. I'm glad that Mr. Yanez was unsuccessful in his attempt to relieve the position of Mr. Parcells the other night. But PUDs, you guys have, all this side of the table has received emails from me about PUDs like the wedge and stuff like this. This side of the table has received emails for my son-in-law's driveway and stuff like this. But I think it's great that you guys all got together to communicate, and I think you guys should do this annually, if not more so. But I appreciate what you guys do, even though I know I challenge Mr. Parcell a lot, and he'll vouch for that. I challenge him on a lot of things when I read the ordinance and bring it to his attention. But thanks for doing this. I'm glad I could come by and listen to you guys. So you guys all have a good night. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Bauer. We appreciate you being here. And so that is it for our agenda. So in closing, I do just want to thank everyone again for being here. More importantly, I want to thank you for your service to the city of Sterling Heights. Nights like this, you know, special meetings, taking you away from your families, taking you away from whatever other opportunities that you have. I know I spoke with a number of members, either from the city council, planning, or zoning. Many of you came here straight from work, didn't have time to eat, came, we had a little bit of food for you here, which was nice. But you're coming straight from work, and now you're getting home pretty late at night. So it doesn't go unnoticed. I can tell you that from the city council standpoint, it does not go unnoticed, and we are very grateful to you. And I know that we have an opportunity probably more often than you do to be standing at the doorsteps of our residents that live in Sterling Heights at city events. They probably come up to us a lot more than they come up to you, although I hope they do come up to you and recognize you from watching the meetings. They tell us that we have a very well-run city, and it is in no small part due to the work of our volunteers, and especially these two boards are right at the top in terms of the necessity for having an orderly, developed, cohesive, good city. And so I want to thank you for the work that you guys do on behalf of all the city council members and really the entire community. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved. Support.
It's been moved and supported without any discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.